Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today it's time to discuss whether I think fourth throw should be banned or not. So let's get into that discussion. First, the basic. Why is fourth throw so strong? Why did fourth throw so much play in the Galactic Championship, even though it's a card we've been having since set 1? So why is it a problem now? Why was it not a problem before? First of all, the basic is this is a card that does card advantage. It's a card that I remember very well when the card just got spoiled in set 1. That was way before the release of the game, and this card was so crazy. The ability for this card to do card advantage, which means taking off a card from your opponent's hand and potentially killing a unit at the same time for only one resource, is as good as it gets for Star Wars Unlimited. Obviously, if you use its fourth throw that way, it's not always reliable and you got to choose your timing carefully. But it's a possibility. It's a possibility, the fact that the card is capable of doing this, and it can do this relatively consistently if you play it smart and at the right moment, is by itself pretty scary. And it's also very flexible. The fact that you get to fourth throw, you have the option to fourth throw yourself, and when you combine it with an expensive card, you can kill any unit with 7 or 8 less HP. So whenever a leader deploy, you can just fourth throw a 7-drop and kill a leader for only one resource, which is absolutely wild. It's crazy efficient in terms of impact on the board for the amount of resource that you are spending. And finally, of course, there is a requirement for this card to work. You need to have at least one force unit in play for this to work, and until set 5, force units were relatively rare, and most of them were not even that good. This obviously has changed with set 5, where we got this massive influx of force units, because obviously that's what the set is about. The set is about Legend of the Force. So now there are really good force units at every stage of the game, from turn 1 to turn 7, and this makes fourth throw ridiculously easy to play. It still requires a build around. You can't just jam fourth throw everywhere, and it still requires you to have units on the board, so fourth throw is not always enabled, but the requirement has become trivial compared to what it was, and this has made the card not more powerful in terms of how impactful it is on the game, but it has made it so a lot more decks could play it than before. And this has obviously resulted into a meta where fourth throw is pretty much everywhere. So now let's answer the usual question that we ask ourselves, that I ask myself every single video I make when I'm talking about a potential ban. And those questions are the following. First, what percentage of the meta does it occupy? For how long has it been the case? Is it fun to play against? Is it oppressive, meaning does it prevent other strategy from existing? And does it create other problems? Like, for example, takes too much time to resolve, provoke like some other undesirable effect. So as far as what percentage of the meta does it occupy, it's hard to draw like an exhaustive meta, because obviously we've only had one tournament since the release of set 5, one major tournament. There's also been a really big tournament called the Galactic Open, but people kind of brought the same deck that in during the Galactic Championship, but this was one gigantic tournament. And you could argue that the day 1 was also kind of it's a separate thing because it had a lot of different players. And between the main event and the Galactic Championship, I've counted the top 64 of the percentage of deck that had fourth throw among the top 64 of the Galactic Championship. I think is the best data point that we have access to right now. And from that data point, we have about 51.7% of the deck who made it to the top 64 had 3 copies of fourth throw in it. That's a lot. That means there were 50% of red force based decks in the meta. That is a lot. For how long has it been the case? So it's a lot. The reason why I'm not putting the number in red here is because even though yes, that card occupies a huge portion of the meta, there's a wide variety of different force decks. We're not in the same situation as like the Jango meta, for example, or Triple Dark Raid, because Triple Dark Raid, 99% of the Triple Dark Raid decks were basically Jango. And the same with Jango. Jango was just only one deck. It was just not, it's a leader, and it was Jango Red specifically. You didn't have 100 different ways of playing Jango. Here, Thorrk is only one card, and it's played in a wide variety of different decks. Han 2 green is very different from Han 2 blue. That is very different from a Talzin. That is very different from a Quinlan. That is very different from a Kylo Tarkin town deck. So even though yes, this number is very, very high, you gotta understand there's a wide variety of different force decks. For how long has it been the case? Well, about 1 month, because it's been since the release of the set. The set released earlier. Obviously, people start playing the game a bit before release when the full spoiler is out. So it's been about a month, give or take. Which is not a long time. It's a very short time, actually. Is it fun to play against? I think I would argue otherwise, but ultimately it is subjective. And the vast majority of people agree that Thorrk is not a particularly fun card to play with. It's not fun to get your card get discarded from you. It's not fun to get your leader killed for only one resource. And I can respect that. I'll give more my opinion on this later on, but as a matter of fact, like, the broad opinion of the community is to say that the card is not fun to play against. Is it oppressive? Yes, it is a bit oppressive. On one hand, it did enable some deck that did not exist before to exist. For example, we see now a wide variety of space aggro decks that did not exist before, notably N4 aggro in space. We saw Kazuda doing well, because those decks do really well against those force decks. So, in one hand, it does enable some stuff to exist, but on the other hand, it also prevents certain things from existing. I'm mostly thinking about, I think the most blatant example is Han 1. Han 1 is literally unplayable in the current meta, because Thorrk just hard counters it. So it's a little bit oppressive. It has some give and take, I would say. Overall, we can agree that the Thorrk meta, the meta we have on set 5, is less diverse than the meta we had during Jump to Light Speed. With that being said, once again, it's hard to compare the two, because in Jump to Light Speed we had an entire season, and that was not the case before the Jango ban. It was after the Jango ban that the meta really started to be diverse, and then from that point on, we had this and for set 5 we only had one big event. So this is something to understand and to keep into account. The next is, does it create other problems? No, it doesn't create any other issue than those mentioned above. So let's get into the more into the reasoning why Thorrk the problem. The first problem with Thorrk is that it makes it very hard to not play red when you play a force deck. So whenever you're playing a force deck right now, you're almost always going to be playing red, because there's just too much good stuff in red. It's not only Thorrk, it's also Force Lightning if you're on the villainy side. It's also Kia di Mundi, Mace Windu, Adigalia, all those cards whenever you're playing in red. So it's very hard to not play red whenever you're playing a Force deck. Red Force decks are too prevalent in the meta. That is undeniable. More than 50% of the meta being red Force deck, even though, once again, there's a wide variety of those different decks. It's still too much. Having his leader killed for one resource can be frustrating, and it doesn't, even if it does come at a cost. So there's a significant cost to one-shotting leaders with, you obviously, there's card advantage, you're spending 2 cards to deal with one, but more importantly, you are discarding what is going to be potentially the most important card for your next few turns, because whenever leader deploys, it deploys on 5, 6, or 7 usually. This is the time of the game where you do not want to resource your 7-drop. It's the moment of the game where you want to keep your 7-drop in hand, so then when you get to that point, you can actually play them, and those are going to be the most impactful play you can make at those stage. So having to discard your potentially most impactful play for the next following turn can have a huge consequences. Unless you manage to draw multiple of them, but that's not always possible. And obviously this requires you to have a Force unit in play, this requires to have a 7-drop in hand, so even if you do happen to draw the 4th throw, it's not always possible to do. So I honestly don't think, like, having the possibility to kill a leader for 1 resource sounds really, really bad on paper, but when you take into account all those little things, it's not as bad as it sounds, but it's still very frustrating, and I can understand that people don't want this to be a thing. 4th throw can also be frustrating when played multiple times in a row. If you're a good player, it's relatively easy to play around 1 4th throw. Keeping 1 cheap card in your hand is not really that big of a problem. However, when someone plays multiple 4th throw in the same turn, this is where 4th throw start to become really, really annoying. Because the first card is not a big deal, the second card is, and then it's just a huge blowout. So multiple 4th throws played in a row in the same turn is really, in my opinion, the most annoying thing about 4th throw. And then last argument is like hand 1 basically is almost unplayable because of 4th throw. As you know, he's a leader that I really, really love. So the fact that it basically got pushed out by 4th throw altogether is definitely an unfortunate consequence. Now let me bring you a few arguments against banning 4th throw. Let me start first with the fact that even though 4th throw is everywhere, there's a very wide diversity of 4th throw decks. So I already talked about this already, but 4th throw is just not one deck, as opposed to Jango, which was pretty much just one deck, or Triple Dark Raid, which was pretty much just the embodiment of one deck. 4th throw, there's a wide variety of different 4th throw decks. And it's not the same also as saying, also the same for Boba 1. Boba 1 had a lot of different Boba 1 decks, so there were a wide variety different, but at the end of the day, it was always the same leader, which had consequence on, which is a card you see every game because it's literally your leader. While 4th throw, it's not even a leader, it's a card. So even though yes, it's everywhere, it's only a card, and there's a wide variety of different 4th throw decks. The second argument is to say that the meta is healthy. There's a fair amount of, it's a very fair meta with a lot of mid-range tempo decks. So if you like those kind of meta where it's mostly made of mid-range decks, there's no like extreme control decks or extreme aggro decks that are really unfun to play against, it's a fairly healthy meta. It's a very fun meta. If you like playing fair mid-range matchups, it's a really fun meta to play in. And it's a relatively diverse meta as well. Once again, you have Hand 2, which is the top deck, but it's like in the environment of like 20%, which is high, but not the end of the world. And then after this, everything is extremely even. And I'm expecting things to even out even more as we move forward. Once again, we only have one big tournament to go from. So that's not a lot. So we have to take this into account. FT 4th throw is strong, but it's at its peak. Since we are in a force focus set, so its dominance is likely to be temporary, especially as we're getting close to rotation. So keep in mind that obviously we are at the middle of the force deck, so it's kind of normal that forced throw is currently at its peak. But I don't think its peak is necessarily going to last, because obviously we're going to get a new set which might not have that many force units, where new archetypes are going to come into play, which might even things out. You're going to have a new influx of archetypes that are going to come in, and if those archetypes are competitive enough, you are going to see the 4th throw mid-range deck kind of having to operate against that. What is going to be interesting is to see if those new archetypes can actually compete with the force. I think this is the moment where the designers have to do some testing internally, run the current 4th throw decks, the current force decks, place them against future potential archetypes enabled by set 5, and see if we are going to end up into a balanced meta once the new set comes out. And the other argument is to say also that we are very close to rotation. Once rotation happens, 4th throw is going to get out anyway. Is it really worth it to ban a card even though it's just about to rotate out? So those are considerations that have to be made. And it's very hard for us to answer that question because we don't know how powerful set 5 is going to be. If set 5 comes in and 4th throw basically and force decks are so strong that nothing can compare with them, that basically the last set has no impact on the game, just like Twilight of the Republic, I think that would be very bad for the game. And that would be a strong argument in favor of banning 4th Throw. But if that's not the case, then there is debate. 4th Throw power level can be strongly mitigated by playing around it and building your deck against it. So this is something I always emphasize on, and I think a lot of people say as well, is that 4th Throw is a lot stronger against people who are not really playing a lot of Star Wars Unlimited, who are relatively casual, because they often forget about it, that it exists, or they don't intuitively play around it. Once you play around it, 4th Throw power level becomes a lot lesser. It's definitely one of these cards that you as a player have some impact on how this is going to impact you. And there's also a lot of things you can do in your deck building to make it a lot worse. So for example, you can call me Al has been super in favor of running Metal Ceremony in his Sabine decks, and it's been working really well for him. Because now he always has like a 0 resource card that he has in hand and he's ready to just play under 4th Throw. Just an example. Another thing, for example, is I used to be playing Palpatine's Return in all my decks, even the decks who run a lot of vehicles. Now, if I'm playing a Piet deck, or if I'm running a Boba deck, a Boba 4 deck, I will always play Salvage instead of playing Palpatine's Return, so I can play around 4th Throw. So those are like the kind of consideration. The last argument is, in my opinion, the strongest argument against banning 4th Throw is that by banning 4th Throw, we are taking the risk of rendering set 5 mostly irrelevant for competitive play. The vast majority of new competitive archetypes are built on the back of 4th Throw. Banning it could result in returning to set 4 meta. So this is something that is quite important to understand, is that 4th Throw is very instrumental in making 4th decks powerful. Some might argue they are too powerful, but they're not too powerful. They're definitely counterable. There's a wide variety of them. And at least they are representing the new set. At least this new set is having an impact on the meta, which is what we always wanted. Even Jump to Light Speed, the impact in terms of archetypes, like if you think about an archetype which is intimately linked to Jump to Light Speed, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about Vader Yellow. That's about it. All the other archetypes you can talk about, of course there's other ones, there are Luke, there's Kazuda, but those were very, very niche. Like if you think about archetype who really had a significant impact on the meta, there's Vader Yellow, there's Boba 4 Daredevil, and then beyond this, you could argue, okay, maybe Piet, but that was also a very niche archetype. So Jump to Light Speed had a very niche impact on the game after all, in terms of archetypes at least. So if we're banning 4th Throw, I'm afraid that we're going to be in a situation where, again, Force is really going to become like a lot more niche, and we're going to end up in that situation where the meta is not going to have a huge impact. The new set is not going to have a huge impact on the meta after this ban happens. So this is kind of like, to me, and we're going to end up resulting into kind of returning into the Daredevil meta that we had in set 4. So I know that a lot of people like this meta, and to me it was one of the best meta we've ever had. But do we really want to come back to this? This is the question we want to ask ourselves. My opinion about it. So far, I've tried to kind of keep it balanced, try to kind of give the pro and the cons in a relatively objective way. I try to be as objective as possible. Now let's talk about my specific opinion on the matter. My opinion is like, if as a player you want to play a radically new meta compared to set 4, where the new set is very prevalent, then you don't want to ban. However, if you hate 4th Throw and you would prefer to revert to something closer to set 4, then you want to ban. This is kind of like the choices that you have to make as And this, obviously, I cannot tell you which of those two options is better. I cannot tell you which one of these two options is better. It's up to you to decide which would you rather be in favor of. Obviously, Star Wars Unlimited is not a democracy, so you don't get to vote, but at least you get to share your opinion, and that opinion might influence the designer's decision. Personally, I'm glad they didn't ban 4th Thor before Galactic Championship. I really wanted to see how the Force Focus meta would look like, and I think it was overall a fun meta. So, something important to understand is, so I've made some strong arguments. I remember Rebel Resource made a video advocating for the ban of 4th Thor, and I strongly talked against it. I was like, let's wait until the Galactic Championship. I personally would be against a ban of... I was strongly against a ban of 4th Thor before Galactic Championship, because I was afraid that if you would ban 4th Thor Galactic Championship, you would end up in that situation where basically the new set doesn't matter. And to me, that would be the worst possible result. And to me, I wanted to see how the Force Focus meta was. And I'm glad I had this opinion, because I really think that the Galactic Championship meta was actually quite fun. Once again, unless you cannot bear playing against 4th Thor, there are a wide variety of different decks you could play. The archetypes were really fair. There were not really any unfair, super hard control thing. Like, if you don't like hard control, this was a great meta. Hard control was pretty much inexistent. I think it was a pretty good meta. And at least it's a meta where the new set had an impact. At least it's a meta that felt different from the set 4 meta. It was just not set 4 meta with a few new cards. It was really a radically different experience. And for me, I'm really, really glad that we get to see this, at least for this tournament. So, in all cases, you can quote me on saying that I think it would have been a mistake to ban 4th Thor before the Galactic Championship happened. But that doesn't mean that 4th Thor doesn't need to be banned now, because now is different. Now we've seen what the meta is like, and now we have to kind of make a decision on which direction we want the meta to go for the remainder of the season. And on this, I don't really have a firm opinion. I understand why people hate playing against 4th Thor, and from an arithmetic standpoint, it's certainly way too prevalent. From a purely percentage point, 50% of the deck playing the same card is a lot. But honestly, I would be okay either way. Like, this is one of the... I'm sorry, my take might disappoint some, because I'm not really taking position. But regardless of FFG, of what they want to do, I'll personally be okay with it. I really, really loved the set 4 meta. I think it was really diverse. So going back to set 4 meta with a few modifications, obviously Quinlan's going to be harder to play if 4th Thor does not exist. There's also going to be new cards, like for example Ogdo is going to be there for hand 2. There's still going to be like you're going to have the Vader ECL combo is still going to be there. So it's going to be different, but it's mostly going to come back to revert to kind of a very different meta. Force decks are not going to be nearly as strong. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. So I'll be excited for this. But if they decide to not ban it, I'll also be excited, because I think that the current meta that we had after the Galactic Championship is also quite nice. So personally, and that's my personal opinion, I'm okay either way. I would be okay regardless of what FFG wants to do with 4th Thor, banning it or not banning it. And I think there's fun to be had in both cases. Okay, we talked about 4th Thor now, but some people have made other suggestions of ban. So let's take a look at the two names I've heard the most. The first name I heard is obviously Han 2. Currently, the best deck, we could say, the one that has the highest percentage of played, and also a deck that did relatively well, ending up with 2 top 8 spots. And my opinion is that yes, it's the best deck in the game, but there's always going to be a best deck in the game, so that's not really an argument by itself. Our data point is very, very small, but I think that the percentage of hand decks is under control. 20% is not that bad. And the fact that we saw the conversion rate of hand 2 was negative between day 2 and day 3 shows that the deck clearly can be beaten. That there is counter to it. And now that the top players have kind of shown the way on how to counter hand 2, people are going to be following up on this, and the environment is going to remain hostile for it. Obviously, if people forget how good hand 2 is and start ignoring it, this is going to be a different story. But as long as people continue to hate on it, I think hand 2 is going to remain kind of on the background. It's going to remain under control. So personally, I have no problem with it. Also, there's a wide variety of different hand deck. Hand 2. There's hand 2 fours, there's hand 2 that don't play fours, there's the one that play green. So to me, yes, he's a very powerful leader, but he also has a really weak leader deploy. 3/6 stat line is very weak. So he has a very powerful ability, but he also has a lot of counters. I don't think hand 2 is a problem, personally. And if you're going to be buying 4th throw, you're going to be nerfing hand 2 because almost every hand 2 decks play 4th throw nowadays. The other suggestion I've heard is Force Lightning. Okay, so Force Lightning, first of all, I found this very sad. Force Lightning has been legal since Spark of Rebellion, has never seen any competitive play until now, and now that it's finally having some moment in the sunshine, people want to ban it. That is so unfair. This guy waited so long for being played, and now that he's played, people want to ban it. That is so sad. In my opinion, that's a terrible idea, because right now there's a relative balance between the villainy force decks and the heroism force decks. And if you're banning Force Lightning, you are effectively putting this balance way off. Because if you think about it, there's not really that many huge force payoff in villainy. Like, in heroism, there's a lot more force enablers. You got like Luke Skywalker, you get like all those great force units. If you take into account, well, if you go into the villainy side, you almost have to rely on the Thousand Sister kind of package in order to get some real good force payoff. And then beyond this, that's just Force Lightning. So to me, banning Force Lightning would just simply favor the Horizon Force deck over the villainy ones. So it would be a horrible idea, and it would actually damage the impact, the meta. So I'm completely 100% against it. Now let's talk about something even more spicy. Do we want anything to be removed from the suspended list? Do we want anything to be unbanned? Let's start first by the original Boba Fett, Boba 1. Would Boba 1 be okay in the new meta? The problem I have with Boba 1 is the fact that having Boba 1 in the game automatically makes playing... If you're playing Cunning Villainy, you can't play Cunning Villainy anything other than Boba. But if you're playing Cunning Villainy, you have to play Boba. He's just the best leader stat-wise and ability-wise in the entire game. So I don't necessarily think that Boba would be the best deck in the new meta. This could be argued. And honestly, nobody can really answer that question unless you actually play them. So it would be dangerous, first of all, because there's a good chance that Boba is still, with the new tools, with Data Vault, with all that stuff, will still be the best deck, because it has undeniably the best leader. No other leaders that has been created since then comes even close to Boba power level. But what I can tell you at least guaranteed, that if you unban Boba, impossible to play Cunning Villainy other than Boba. Boba would automatically, every time you want to play Cunning Villainy, you automatically would have to play Boba, which I don't think is good for the game. So my opinion is that regardless of whether you think Boba is going to completely take over the meta, or whether you think he's just going to be this gatekeeper of the Cunning Villainy, either way, it's not good. So I wouldn't want to unban Boba 1. Next is Jango. For Jango, it's a relatively easy one. Jango, I think if Jango was unbanned along Triple Dark Raid, if the original Jango would still be there, it would destroy everything. It's still by far the best deck we've ever seen in Star Wars Limited. It would destroy everything on its path. It would just chew those false deck, it would shoot them for breakfast. It would destroy them. That's not even close. So, you can unban Jango without triple dark raid. Well, my opinion is like, if you really want to enable those kind of playstyle, I would rather unban triple dark raid, which can be played in a wide variety of different decks. Which we think about the Doku yellow, we think about the Piet yellow, that kind of decks. I think I would love to see those decks with triple dark, even like the Boba 4 yellow, which I think was not even that good. So those decks would really love to see triple dark raid. And I think if you really want to enable this kind of playstyle, those kind of triple dark raid vehicle decks, you would do a much better job on banning triple dark raid instead of banning Jango. So for me, it's a clear no. And if you want to enable this playstyle, just please unban triple dark raid. Don't unban Jango. Okay, triple dark raid is an interesting case. What we were afraid of when triple dark raid was banned was that in the future it would just be so hard to make it so new vehicles don't just automatically mess up triple dark raid again. But since then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that there is no vehicle in the new set, no vehicle in that came out in Legend of the Force that would actually break triple dark raid. So triple dark raid would basically be at the same power level than it was in set 4, but obviously without Jango, which is a big deal. So you would see triple dark raid once again in those Piet decks. You would see Boba yellow. One of the big arguments in favor of banning triple dark raid back then was that yellow was everywhere. Now yellow is actually one of the least played color in the game. If you look at the color breakdown of the Galactic Championship, you would see that yellow is actually the least played color. Actually, I think there were only, out of the 8 decks that made it to top 8, there were only 2 yellow decks in the meta. So, and 2 were actually heroism deck, because it was never mind. There was also the Vader deck, I guess. You could make also the argument that triple dark raid would be too good in too good in Vader 4. So that's interesting. I honestly don't know what the right answer is for it. If there's no busted vehicle in set 6, there is an argument for unbanning triple dark raid. There's an argument for it. Personally, if they decide to do it, I would find this interesting. I would not be completely opposed to it, but obviously this would require some really careful testing on their side, because obviously from my perspective it's always hard to tell because I don't do any testing. I haven't done any testing with those unbanned cards because that's not what we focus on in Enigma. We focus on training to win tournaments. The last card is obviously DJ. So from a fun perspective, from a purely fun perspective, the main reason why DJ got banned is because of the negative player experience. It's because it was just not fun to have your resource being stolen from you. DJ is kind of similar to Thorrk in a way that if you know how to play around it, he's not as good as Thorrk, but his existence was really, really powerful, and obviously Han 1 was incredibly strong. Now that Han 1 is basically unplayable, there's an argument to say, well, now that Han 1 basically sees no play, you could unban DJ, so we can play Han 1 again, maybe. So that's very interesting, especially since it's a smuggle card, and smuggles are really helpful against fourth throw. On this one, I say, if fourth throw is not banned, there is an argument to unban DJ. However, if once again your main argument against DJ is to say he's not fun to play against, please no, then sure, don't put him back. But from a purely balance standpoint, in the current meta, you could totally in the current meta with fourth throw being legal, you could totally unban DJ. And it would make Han Yellow like a strong consideration again, but I still believe Han 1 Yellow would survive, would struggle a lot in this fourth throw meta. So there's actually an argument to be made that you could unban DJ, and it would have actually no consequence on the meta because, as we know, DJ is really a Han card, and playing Han in this environment is just impossible. So yeah, maybe you could unban it. That's it for me for this video. So basically my final opinion, as I said, is as far as the ban is concerned, the only ban that I would agree with would be a 4th throw ban, and I don't think it's necessary. That's the only ban I would agree with, and I'm fine either way. I'm fine if FFG decide or to ban 4th throw or to not ban 4th. As far as unban is concerned, I would be okay with a DJ unban if 4th throw was not banned, and I would be okay with a triple dark raid unban, assuming there's nothing that breaks the card on set 6, and after this it just rotates out, so it's okay. So it's kind of my final opinion, and once again, also for the unban consideration, granted there's a lot of testing being done to make sure everything is okay in the background, which obviously I didn't do. That's the designer's job to do. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with me, if maybe there's some arguments that I've missed, if there's other card you would like to see banned, or if there's other card you would like to see unbanned, please let me know in the comments below. And until then, I'll see you next time.